Okay, it is 5 o'clock in Montreal, so let's go ahead and get started. This is AI Preferences. If you're not here for AI Preferences, perhaps at least you brought some popcorn. Remote folks, if you could turn your mics and video off until you're actually recognized in the queue, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. We'll kick off with the updated Note Well notice. This is a reminder of the policies that apply when you participate in an IETF meeting. If you're not familiar with these, you can find them by using your favorite internet search engine. Hi, join us. Thank you. To search for IETF Note Well. And they cover things like, for example, professional behavior and the reference there to the Code of Conduct and anti-harassment policy, what to do if you have concerns. It's talking about the contributions you make, especially regarding intellectual property. So, for example, the patents or patent applications that you have or that are controlled by you or your employer, as well as information about the process that we use, and a notice about privacy, the fact that we have records of these meetings, including this one, which will eventually show up on a large internet video engine. If you have any questions, feel free to talk to Suresh or myself or an area director or anyone else from leadership, and they can give you more details. And we also wanted just to add to that, please, as we're interacting, keep in mind we really do want everyone to treat each other with respect, to assume the best intentions. It's not personal, Tom, don't worry. It's not about you. But we really need, to come to consensus, to come to agreement about these things. We need to do so wholeheartedly and with good intention. So we will now do the most traditional part of the meeting where we sit silently and ask for someone to take notes. Was anyone willing to scribe for the meeting? I know Ecker has a longer term solution plan for this, but in the meantime, we need a volunteer.
I think we don't need blow by blow minutes, just high level summaries and decision points could be useful. So if you are willing to do it, we need somebody to scribe, otherwise the meeting cannot go on.
Hey, this is Meredith Jacob. I'm online, but I can do it if you'd like.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Meredith. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And the link to go to the notes is in the top of the agenda as well as in the data tracker.
And yeah, and the Meet Echo as well. So there's there's like a pencil and notepad next to AIPREF. So if you click on it, you can collaboratively note take to help the two wonderful people who volunteered. Thanks.
Sorry, my Meet Echo client is not happy. Do you want me to take over? Can you take over? Yeah. Oh, wait, no, here it comes. Perhaps. Okay, good. So agenda bashing. Our plan is that today we're going to have a brief overview of where we're at as a working group, get everyone on the same page regarding that. We're going to have an update. The only editor we have here in the room is Martin. So Martin's going to give us an update of the most recent changes that were made and the thinking behind them and where he's at with those. And then we're going to go through a detailed discussion of the vocabulary document. On Wednesday, we propose we're going to continue that discussion, and if we have time, we'll talk about attachment. There haven't been changes to that recently, and I think per our discussion previously, we really need to get the vocabulary nailed down more urgently, so that's where most of our focus is going to be, and then we'll wrap up by talking about our next steps, including the potential for future meetings. Any agenda bashing? Okay. So, very briefly then, where we're at. This is a slide that if you attended the Zurich meeting should be familiar. We presented this slide there. After the Brussels meeting, we appeared to have convergence and strong momentum towards shipping the documents that we had at that point, roughly on schedule. But since that Brussels meeting, we had a lot of folks join us, and it became apparent that there were some strong disagreements in the group. And we did a working group last call. That working group last call failed, and so we're now effectively back to square one, where we have to figure out how do we get towards consensus. Our original milestones were to ship that in August of this year. We asked for those milestones to be changed to August 2026 to reflect the fact that we still need to make a lot of progress. That August 2026 date really reflects just the uncertainties around that status. It's not a specific date. At this point, whether we actually get to consensus by then is unforeseeable. Yes. So in our more recent Zurich meeting, we talked for an extended period about changes that could be made to the drafts to address some of those issues that were raised in the working group last call and around that. Not all of them, but some of them. It was the start of a discussion around that. And so the editors, after that meeting, took away that discussion and talked amongst themselves and refined those ideas and put together a set of drafts that were published, unfortunately, quite recently because it took some time, that attempt to reflect that discussion we had in Zurich. These are tentative ideas. And so in this meeting, we want to hear the preliminary feedback on those proposals. We're not going to finish in this meeting. This is just the start of a longer discussion about those proposals. We want to get a sense today and after today as to whether this direction that we came up with in Zurich is fruitful and better than what we had before, to see if it's the basis of the ongoing work that we have, knowing that it is going to need to be adjusted and continually analyzed as we move along. So we're not making decisions today. We're really just starting that discussion as a group. And so what we're going to do, as I said, we're going to get an update from Martin. The plan today is we want to go through the 4 major terms that are now in the vocabulary: foundation, model production, search, AI output, and automated processing, and just listen and discuss and try and narrow down how do we feel about those, what issues still remain with them, are they suitable as the basis for the work, are there intrinsic problems that might, we really need to dig into, and get a sense of how we feel as a group about each of those terms. If there's time after those, we'll start to discuss other cross-cutting issues that have been raised. In the issues list has a number of different things in it that are not specific to those terms. We have not forgotten those. We need to get some certainty around these terms as a matter of urgency right now. So we will eventually get to those. Don't worry about that. But a large part of this is just how do we segment up the discussion so that we can have productive discussions about each of these without taking in the entire set of concerns in the drafts. So we just ask for folks' patience as we try to do that. With all that said, I think that's the introduction. Martin, do you want to come up and give your overview? There we go.
Yeah. Tom will appreciate this by the end. Next slide, please. So this did turn out to be pretty difficult. And I think the discussion that we had in Zurich was looking like it was going to turn out to be a positive direction. And that too turned out to be pretty difficult. So let's see where we are.
Difficult.
Yeah. So this is where we started. And this was the picture that was in the diagram, in the draft prior to the current ones. And so those people who were preparing for the meeting as of 2 weeks ago would have seen this picture. Next slide. But what we learned, I think some of the revelations in Zurich were probably the more interesting ones. We don't all have a common shared understanding of what it means to say search. And that turns out to be kind of fundamental in all of this. We all knew that search used AI. Some of us had different understandings of how much that was involved in the use of search engines. And we heard unequivocally from some search providers that they use not just the trained models, but they also train the models in the process of producing search results, which to some people was a surprise, caused a bunch of back and forth and discussions about those sorts of things. But at least from my perspective, after having those discussions, I'm convinced that this is how it works. Next, please. So the definition of search that we had before, I won't read all of the words on here, but the primary thing here was directing people to the location from which the assets were retrieved. There's a bunch of reasons why that's not necessarily a great definition for search in this context. And so I don't know that we're focused on this a lot. I have these on the slides here in case we wanted to reference back to them, but I don't think there's any point in spending a lot of time on this. You can skip this slide and the next slide, which talks about search more generally. And this is where we ended up after having those discussions. And so there's sort of two pieces to the changes here. The first is on that sort of left-hand side there, you'll see that where we previously had two categories that were nested, AI training and generative AI training, that's really been collapsed into this concept of producing a foundation model. Again, there's some interesting questions in the definition of that I'll get to. And on the right-hand side, where we previously had search, now we have this sort of AI output category and a search category. This is how it's spelled in the graph right now. There is absolutely no certainty about the structure of this right now. Several people have suggested that search is not a subcategory of AI output. That will be determined by the definitions that we come up with. The definitions right now are very much in flux. So we'll show you what we have, and then we can have a discussion about those sorts of things. I don't have the text in the document on the slide. I expect that people are able to use the screens in front of them to find the text that's in the document. Next, please. So the top level category is at risk, I would say. Lots of debate about this. We had a fairly lengthy discussion raising a sort of pros and cons. There are some kind of interesting pros and cons in the sense that some of the pros are the sort of direct dual of the cons, and one in particular is about this sort of unexpected uses or unintended consequences piece of that, which is that some people deliberately want to have a top level category so that they can say yes or no to things that they don't know about, and other people think that that would be a bad thing. And so that's probably one of the key points of disagreement about this one. And obviously there's a bunch of things that are covered in that category that some people would suggest shouldn't be, and that too becomes a point of discussion. But we'll talk about this as we get into the discussion piece. I just wanted to give you a recap on this one. This really hasn't changed in the current shape of things. It's just always been contested. Next, please. Foundation model training. So the sense that I got was that people were not interested in litigating or having preferences that relate to what happens inside a system, but wanted to focus on what pops out the other side. And so the point of this foundation model creation or foundation model production thing was to say, if a foundation model comes out the other end, then maybe you want to have something to say about that. And so focus on the fact that there will be a system that produces a foundation model. And it's sort of, to a large extent, the foundation model definition is much better understood than this concept of generative AI training. Foundation models have pretty widely agreed definitions. There's variations across different definitions, but they all sort of share the same structure. Most foundation models are able to they have generative capabilities in some form or other. And so that was something that was recognized in discussions. So I think the idea here is to find something that's much better defined, again, focus on the output, and in the process, sort of avoid the contention that we hit when we were talking about the AI training category that we previously had, where the line between something simple like ordinary least squares and what we conceive of as AI is incredibly difficult to define. And so there was a lot of contention about where that line sits as well. So that's where that one's at. Next, please. AI output. So this was, I think, the sort of culmination of a bunch of things that were discussed during the meeting. I think it was rooted in some of the concepts that Microsoft proposed in this, but it was massaged into different forms during the process of discussions in Zurich. The core idea, I guess, is to concentrate on the observable outcomes of any given system. If that system uses AI internally, we don't care. If that system uses training internally, it trains models for the purposes of its operations, then we don't care. And I think part of the intent of this was to try to address some of the substitutive concerns that people have. The idea that the AI systems would be producing things that would be a substitute for the thing that was being used. And I think that's the intent. We'll realize there's a bunch of challenges around this definition as well. So next, please. So those who were there in Zurich may remember the image. So this concept of exact text match, I think, was the phrase that was used in Microsoft's proposal. Is basically, the idea is that you have conditions, additional conditions on the use of things, such that rather than having general output, so the use of an asset to produce some output in arbitrary form, chatbots included, AI overviews included. Exact text match says that if you're going to use this thing to produce an output, you have to take text from it, or take an image from it, or whatever it is. You have to take an excerpt of the original and present that directly. And at the same time, provide a link back to where it came from. And this sort of fits to some extent with the conception of the very simple 10 blue links that people sort of think of a search being. Obviously, what we learned was that that's not how search works at all. But this is the sort of version of that. And so the current definition of that just takes the AI output definition and adds these two conditions. If you're going to put it in the output, don't paraphrase or what have you, just include quotes from it and link back. And as we'll see, even this is challenging, and we don't know what to call it. Those who were there in Zurich were calling it Lederhosen, and I don't think that's really a great label for anything. But we'll see how that works out. And anyway, it's nested, as you can tell. Next slide, please. So we want to acknowledge that we came into the process in Zurich having a pretty significant pile of issues to work through. And I think we came out the other end with maybe a new direction, but that just added a bunch more problems. And I'm going to go through some of those problems that we have here. Obviously, there's should we have a top-level category? There's the questions about the difference between the different model training categories that we had before and the ones that we have now, and what that means. And there's a bunch of issues around these new AI output-based things. So next, please. So the definition of producing a foundation model is challenged because the definition presently includes fine-tuning, and no one knows what fine-tuning means. And that's not great. There's a bunch of techniques that you can use. Some of them look like the training that you would do, and others look different. Fine-tuning also includes things like system prompt engineering, which is not necessary to some people, right? So Kevin's shaking his head, which is a fine response to that, but to other people, I've heard in issues that some people say that they fine-tune their models by changing the prompts. And I believe that was fairly consistent. I believe that's how Mecha Hitler came about, for instance, right? And so, and then there's also these other techniques like low rate adaptation, which doesn't change the weights of the model, but provides a supplemental model, and many other techniques that obviously might come about. So we'll need to work through this one. Next, please. The other is, what do we mean when we say output? So there's a number of questions around this one. And this one to me is very unclear in the original text. And we had a bunch of discussion about this, and it seems like we came up with some answers. And then I went back and reflected on it, and I have no idea what we're talking about anymore. And I went back and read the various proposals. I've read 3 versions of Microsoft's text, and none of them make any sense to me now, and I don't know what they mean. So simple question here would be, so one of the original pieces of text said, things that are presented to a human. What does that even mean? When you're talking about a system, can you guarantee that you're presenting to a human? What if you're presenting to an AI agent that's consuming the content and using it in the context of agentic browsing? Should you be responsible for knowing that it is a human when you're making this determination? Would saying once it leaves the domain of your control be a more reasonable thing to say in that context, rather than say present it to a human, because we don't know what happens downstream once it leaves your system? And so that's an interesting question to ask. And then it is unclear to me what it means to say yes or no with this. Is it just the output stage of a system that we're talking about? How do you decouple the output stage from everything that happens in the internals of that system? How do you guarantee that if you have an asset that's being used so simple example, search, you imagine that there's a bunch of things and you're going to rank all the things, and then you're going to pick the top 10, and then you're going to present them. Now, you might have a model that does that ranking, and then you could have a very simple output stage. Now, that might be a simple thing that you could say that the ranking that uses AI is decoupled from how the presentation works. But we've learned that the search applications are not that simple. There's a lot more complexity involved, and there's AI used at various points in these processes. And we saw examples of search applications that do much more than just rank a few things and present them all in a list. And so where does that line happen? And particularly for the AI output category, which I think is intended to include things like chatbots and that sort of thing, how do you ensure that whatever internal processing happens doesn't then propagate through into the output somehow? If you have a model that's doing some internal ranking that gives some instructions to an output model, how do you ensure that the information that's only available to the internal processing doesn't end up in the output model's inputs, such that it ends up getting propagated into any outputs? All these questions, I think, are pretty challenging, and I don't even know how to answer this. There's no preference for this. So really what we want to get down to is what tests would we apply to determine whether a preference was being followed or not? How would you test something? And I think that might be a good razor that we can apply, is to say, where do we sit the test, and what does that test say? Something to think about. Next slide, please. So we have a problem of naming. What do we call this thing? It's certainly not going to be leather short trousers things. It's probably difficult to know whether or not this is a subcategory of AI output. The current shape of the definition sort of suggests that it is, but that has some kind of interesting, icky implications for one of the potential combinations of preferences that might come out. So maybe it makes sense to spell it differently or structure it differently. And do we even have a concept of search in relation to this? Does it even make sense to say something like that? And that's a challenge here. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is a quote. Tom will recognize it. One of the things I like about this quote is that there's someone declaring that it's difficult, lemon difficult, and then the chair of the meeting says, "Right, we seem to be coming to a consensus."
Thanks for that, Martin. So we are about a half an hour in. We've got about an hour and a half left. I think we'd be just very happy to spend the balance of our time today talking about those 4 terms and seeing if we can come to a better idea about how we feel about them. We put them in a fairly intentional order. It's our perception of how solid they are. That may change based on discussion. So it's the foundation model production, and then search, and then AI output, and finally the umbrella term, the top level term as we've called it. So I know we have a fair number of new folks. Just as a reminder, if you want to speak, you need to get up to the mic queue, but before you do that, you need to get into the queue on the on-site tool. And there's a little button to do that, and that will put you on the screen in an order that allows you to decide when you need to get up to the microphone. So let's go. It'd be great if we could try to focus on one term at a time so that we can have a more productive discussion. And so I think we will start with the, where did we want to start?
Foundational.
The foundation model production term. Sure.
Yeah, throw it up. Just to clarify what Mark said, he said order of consensus. I think order of least consensus at the bottom.
I didn't say consensus at all.
Okay.
That word did not escape my lips.
Okay, so I think the bottom things we think are probably going to take more time. At least like that would be the thing. So we would kind of try to get at least something out of the way before we get into the more contentious issues. Is the point? Yeah. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Hey folks, Hey folks, I'm Roberta. Can I ask 2 stupid questions?
There's no stupid question.
Okay, maybe there is. I don't know. One of them is foundational models is related to the article foundational agents. The scope of foundational agents that they put for agents that construct the models that we have, the large language models. It's like a 300 pages article into the, no?
I'm not familiar with that one. And it's foundation, not foundational. If
Oh.
Yeah, it's
See?
there's a very long article on that.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not familiar with that. So if you could provide a link or something like that, we can.
Yeah, I can
talk
put
about
on
it.
Mitaco.
Great. Yep.
And the other question that might be stupid is how search entered at this context, because search seems to be a use. And I saw that we have a lot of discussions about this specific subject, but this is more, I'm a newbie, right? So it's more catching where we are right now with this. And I'm trying to understand this part of the discussions as well. This is why.
So we originally, way back when, we added search pretty early on, because there was a concern expressed that if you disallow AI in some form, and especially around AI training, that could be misinterpreted accidentally, willfully, whatever, as also disabling search. And for a lot of people, that was a very bad outcome.
Okay.
And so we needed a way to accept search, that particular application, for the purposes here so that it was clear what the intent was. Now, in discussion, that has expanded and contracted various times. Some people really would like to see more fine-grained controls over search and so forth and so on. And so we go back and forth. But that was the original intent. And maybe one of the questions to ask here is if we've changed the definition of AI training to foundation model creation, is that exception still necessary? So that's an interesting discussion to have, perhaps.
Yeah, my understanding is the exception would be necessary. What I hear is that people building search products use foundation models in the process of the creation of those products, right? And I mean, the conception that we have of search is very broad now, and some of them are basically exclusively foundation models that have been tweaked in various ways. I'm not going to use fine-tuned or any of that sort of language, but they've been tweaked in various ways to be better suited to that particular application, but they are still fundamentally a foundation model.
Thanks. And Roberta, I think to another part of the question, the nesting of search inside AI output is tentative, like Martin said in another slide. So it is like kind of sitting in this point. And welcome to your first IETF meeting, and thanks for speaking up.
Thank you.
Brad, are you remote?
Hi there. Thanks. So I had a question about the scope of a foundation model as well, and the connection with fine tuning. I guess it relates to some of the points that might have just been raised in the prior intervention. And it seems to me that right now the focus is on foundation models because perhaps they are the broadest, creations that on which other downstream uses are based. But from the perspective of those who are thinking about ways in which their content might be used, a focus is probably going to be quite specifically on the fine-tuning aspect, which will be creating different applications on top of that foundation model. And those two things seem to me to be distinct enough to warrant being considered separately, because the types of uses that fine-tuning can create could be very specific to the value of the content or the use of the content that's being used to fine-tune a model. So, for example, using scientific or medical journals or medical publications to produce a fine-tuned version of a foundational model, which is very specific and its own product. So I'm a little bit confused, and I think maybe those that are on the user side who would be deploying these preferences may have questions about such a broad category, which is certainly set to evolve in a way that the focus on the foundational aspect is probably going to become less important over time as the various uses begin to kind of tentacle out from that.
Alyssa.
I have some questions.
Really?
Who doesn't like to come to a mic and ask questions? So my first question is, if we imagined that the foundation model production category was an AI model production category, just for a second, I know that makes people allergic, would the span of processes that are included between AI output and AI model production be the entire span of all the things that we can do with AI systems? In other words,
That's a great
do you see what I'm
question.
saying?
Yeah.
Is it meant to be like input and input plus output equals the whole universe of things? Or is that not the case?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's a good question. I think it covers a lot of that space, but I don't know that I could guarantee that it would not cover things that you would think of as AI. Does that help? Because
I guess less about I would ask it maybe the other way, which is like if the if the AI output category was instead a foundation model output category, would the sum of the two things cover everything
yeah.
that a foundation model, every process related to a foundation model?
That I think is probably a good approximation for this, but I don't know that I could guarantee it mathematically. Sorry.
Well, it's a preference. It's never going
Yeah.
to be guaranteed mathematically.
Exactly. But
it would be helpful to understand.
I don't know
that's
that
the intent.
Yeah, I don't know that there would be things that wouldn't fall into those two categories, but would still be called foundation model stuff or AI. I think people's conception of what AI is pretty broad and vague. And so that's maybe not a good label to use here, but I understand what you're trying to ask. And I don't know that I can give you a definitive yes or no on that one. Maybe someone else can.
Okay.
Maybe everyone has their own answer to the question, and maybe that's not such a bad thing, but maybe it's a terrible thing. I don't know.
Okay. I will just echo what was starting to be discussed in the chat that, I mean, same as it was with the definitions previously, like other entities have defined some of these terms and they are in wide use.
Oh, yeah.
So to the extent that we can reuse and cite, it would be good to do so.
Yeah.
Like we don't need to reinvent
I
the wheel.
did the research on this one, and all of the definitions agree, aside from some of them have very specific parts in it, so that some of them will say of 1 billion parameters or more, or of 10 billion parameters or more. And I didn't think that was particularly useful because most of the definitions didn't have that clause in it. And there was another one, it's in the pull request that I put together. There's another thing where they didn't all agree, but most of them are very much in agreement. Oh, it was self-supervision learning was the self-supervised learning was the other thing where some of the definitions say probably trained using self-supervised learning. And I was like, do we need to say probably in this? Probably not.
Okay. It would be good to see the list of citations, I guess. Maybe they're in the PR. Yeah. And then just the last observation is, I think because the definitions are in a lot of flux, it would be really helpful to have just like a set of use cases that we test them against every time they change, that cover, like, broadly speaking, the ones that have been the subject of discussion in the working group for a long time, but we haven't really like defined them. We don't always go back to the same ones.
Are you volunteering?
Nope, I'm absolutely not volunteering. All I do is parachute into this working group and then leave. So, but I do think it would be helpful to have, because I find myself asking the same questions over and over.
I think we each have our own tests that we apply, and I think that's part of the problem. Is
Yes.
It would be helpful to be able to do that. I'm not sure that we're far enough along for that, but maybe we should.
I mean, like,
do
just
some
like,
of that
just-
exercise. Yeah.
They don't have to be complete, but
Yeah.
they just have. Here's the 10 of them. You know.
Yeah.
and so-
Would just like a wiki page capturing that be good enough for now?
Yeah. I don't. We don't need to publish it. It's just
Yeah,
like a set of them to have. Yeah.
Okay, thanks,
We'll
Elizabeth.
try and coordinate that maybe.
Ted?
Ted Hardy. I'm definitely not a lawyer, but I want to talk for a moment about something lawyers do, which is shepherdizing. And shepherdizing is a process that lawyers do to go back, and this is true for the common law in particular, to go back through a series of precedents to understand how a particular case has been cited in a variety of contexts. And it started out literally as a bunch of books on a wall published by shepherds that you went through and kind of searched manually, found the first one. It had citations that you then followed backward and forward. It's an extraordinarily manual process in its first iteration, and it got increasingly mechanical to the point where eventually things like LexisNexis and others basically did shepherdizing for you, and you typed it in and it gave you the answer. I'm sure that there are AI companies that do shepherdizing for you. I don't follow that deeply at the moment, but I really worry as we're talking about these things, we're very focused on hows and not so focused on why somebody would express a preference. And there's an old saying, don't ship your org chart. I don't think we're quite there, but we're kind of like trying to figure out what we would put in an org chart so we could ship that. And I think what we actually have to kind of step back and say is, why do people want to express this preference? And given that they want to express this preference, what's the set of categories that's understandable both to them, which ain't this, and to the people who have to interpret that preference and say, do I fall in this category or not? And I think that means some of what we're trying to do here is so much more complicated than the actual preferences for most of the people who will eventually design these. And so if I was thinking about the use case that Alyssa just said, there are a whole bunch of small creators on things like fanfiction.net or Royal Road or AOR. If I went to them and said, do you want this to be used? I have to be able to express what it's going to be used for in short, crisp words that they're going to be able to understand. And you know, as much as I think shepherdizing is basically lederhosen, I agree with you that we can't use lederhosen. But I think when we're talking about this, we're functionally talking about three broad categories, one of which is a series of citations. And yes, we all know PageRank isn't used by Google anymore, but we all know that there's a category of things where you're getting a series of citations back from your interaction with the content. There's one where you're going to it and you're getting an answer. You're asking it, who won the World Series? And you're not getting a series of citations. They're saying it was the Dodgers. Sorry, Blue Jays. And then there's a third where you're saying, I don't actually want an answer or a series of citations. I want to begin an interaction. And those are really three categories that I could go to somebody at fanfiction.net and say, do you want your content to be the basis of any of these three? If so, which ones? And I don't think that the more we think about how, the harder it's going to be for the people who have to express preferences to reason about what it is they have to say to get their preference recognized, if not obeyed. So I just want us to maybe step back to the user interface part of this and say, this is AI preferences. Think from the perspective of the person who has to express them a little bit more. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted.
I want to respond to that too. Hello, I'm Shay Chen. I've been working on a ID on content licensing, kind of in this space. Came up with a couple definitions that might be helpful or might not be helpful. There was the historical search type definition where people were using it to eventually redirect to the original content. There's the pulling data in order to cache the information and permanently modify a model. There's temporary data where you would pull the information for like a real-time, like a summarization or something where that doesn't permanently store. And then, there could be, and those were kind of like the big areas that I was thinking of on defining the models, and then having like additional ability, like in IANA, to define additional categories as a registry. So if you wanted to register a new category, that's a sub thing of the bigger categories, could possibly do that. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Shay. I think like part of the things that are not clear is the hierarchy and do we need a broad category? So I think like we kind of started off from the same point, like that, like, we should start with something and then it can be subclass later, but I don't think we've managed to get consensus on that. So I think thanks for the pointer, but I think that's like further down the path that we need to handle this thing.
Yeah, I agree that, there's a bunch of definition that needs to occur. But maybe it's an attractive model there, where you have search, and search is special because search is old, and you have a certain you have the expectations, and then the real time and the not real time, as opposed to whether it's an output, whether it's an input, is one way of thinking of it. But
Thank you. Eric?
Eric Nygren. I think following up on actually the last two comments,
Sorry, can you speak up just a little closer to the mic?
following up on the last two comments, like I had some thoughts similar to those. Is it worth thinking about this in a kind of quantitative aspects of how the data gets used dimensionally, rather than as a kind of in a taxonomy within a taxonomy? So, for example, like I'm not sure this is going to be usable to people, but a lot of these elements are how much does the data get aggregated? So if you have a large set of things, how much does it get aggregated in and kind of intermixed with other people's stuff, as well as on the other end of things, how much of that is preserved out? So search, for example, is a case where it might be intermixed with a bunch of stuff coming in, but when it comes on the output side, it's in some ways one-to-one, and there is a way to link it over to the input with the preservation. Whereas things that are kind of foundation model building is really you're pulling lots of stuff together. By the time the model gets built, you've lost a lot of the context, and some of the actual AI output is more in the kind of dimensionally in a response to an individual query, kind of constructing something out that might be, and it's less from kind of some of the differences from these is less that of it being this a separate thing, as much as how many different things are getting pulled together, and are you going and like agentically going and looking out for specific things to construct an output. So maybe if there's some set of dimensions that you have here, there's ways to quantify those in ways that have a kind of a quantitative scale of this is aggregating in at this dimension, or this is one-to-one in outputs. On the other hand, I'm not sure if an approach like that is going to be at all useful to the content provider who wants to go and prevent some art they posted from being extrapolated and combined into some other people's AI art stuff.
Okay, Nick?
hey, so I like these terminologies, these changes that have been made. Foundation model makes a lot of sense. I guess my question here, and this could be a way to help decide whether this is the right division or not, is that AI crawlers are the folks who are going to be subject to these constraints, have to know themselves which category they fit into. And so I think that's going to get a lot more complicated going forward as these systems themselves become massive. You'll have teams within companies that are responsible for a small tool. They don't know whether on the back end it goes incorporated in a foundation model or not. I think this is a good thing. It may cause these companies to have to do some type of audit and some type of deeper analysis as to which components do what. But I think a good way of judging whether these are good categories or not is whether the crawlers themselves can self-categorize with these labels.
Roberta?
Yeah, so understanding a little bit what everyone was mentioning, one of the things I'm still thinking, okay, I'm really sorry if this is not the scope, but when you say that other machine learning techniques, and you mentioned deep learning, I think about foundation agents as well, because you have diffusion, you have reinforcement learning, or deep learning, like the base of generative AI, which is the transformer. Everything is kind of expression of that. And when you take a foundation model and you see it as an LLM or something that will aggregate lots of data, this is kind of a way to see actually how the agents will interact between a system. Like foundational model would be a system of internal agents that will aggregate large quantities of data. And when you put that into perspective, there are people at the chat saying about embedding and agents that are or models that are trained for one specific thing that are not generative. They're more linked to a specific task. And this is broader AI, like it's more predictive in some cases. And this is where I got confused, right? Because if we're getting the foundation model and speaking about the the specific deep learning and agents inside of it, we're missing a part of categories, and at the same time not including the other part of it. And I just wanted to see if this is kind of a common issue rolling with the foundation model perspective, or if this is
Right. So we do have a more broad category that we'll get
Okay.
to. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Anyways, thank you. Any other feedback on this foundation model term? Sorry, production term. I don't know if it's worthwhile to do any polling on this. It's still early days. The use case suggestion, and I think I interpreted Ted's comment as supporting that idea, sounds like a fruitful way forward to test this and the other terms indeed. The only thing that occurred to me was, Ted, you were describing, I think, use cases around search and chat interface. And I think a large part of the complexity of our discussions to date has been that the use cases are much, much broader than that. And so it could be quite extensive. Yeah. Fars.
Yeah, hi. So for the use cases, I sent an email to the mailing list, and I think that we need to have more clarity on the declarant or the publisher or whatever we want to call them. Define the publishers. Be clear that by publisher, we don't only mean those who have intellectual property. And also, I provided some examples. They're brilliant. But just
Thanks, Lars. Totally objective.
yeah. So for example, when WordPress is a declarant for the websites it hosts, or social media platforms could be the declarants. It can be they are or they are not. Or news media organizations, IT department is a declarant for the content that they host, so that we have more clarity on who is and by who is I don't mean identity. I mean which organization, and yeah, more clarity in general. Thank you.
So I'm interpreting that as we also need to think about use cases for attachment effectively and its impact on the ability to express preferences accurately. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes, absolutely. Because we want to also know if these declarants are actually expressing preferences on behalf of somebody else. And I have also mentioned in my email that we don't talk about this much, but there should be some level of transparency from the declarant to the to whoever they are declaring the preference for what they have declared. That didn't make sense, but I just mean that if the site operator, like somebody else is doing the preferences, doing the declaration of preferences for them, there has to be some kind of way to communicate that.
Okay. Timid robot.
I just wanted to maybe get more information on the idea of articulating the, like, I guess, intellectual property status or copyright status of the declaring party. That seems kind of counterproductive to me for the purposes of expressing the preference. Especially because while many people want some expression of AI preferences because they are the copyright holder, there are also many people who want an expression of AI preferences because, you know, they foot the perhaps they foot the cost of the infrastructure providing the content. And so it feels to me like if we are going to try to tie AI preferences back to other legal rights like copyright, that we will be reducing their efficacy and potentially just duplicating legislations that and controls that already exist. But perhaps I'm not fully understanding all of the components.
No, I think that's a good point, Timid Robot, and I think we might continue that discussion when we get to attachment on Wednesday. It's good to see you and your cat there. Okay. Perhaps we should move on then to the term formerly known as search, or not yet fully confirmed as search. So Martin's face says it all.
Yeah. Please don't put this on screen. This is embarrassing. But it's my best approximation of what I thought I heard at the meeting in Zurich. You can read it if you like. I really don't like the fact that a static image continuously gets blurry and spends 400 kilobits per second.
This is the best we can do.
This is not great, but still, spend a moment. But feedback on this would be interesting, and that goes from whether it be nested, whether it makes sense to have these conditions, whether or not it makes sense to call it search, whether or not this is an approximation for what people might want out of something. How would you distinguish it if it's not a search category? How would you define a search category if you were to define a search category? Those sorts of things are all fair game right now. All right, I'm going to put it out there. So the best way to get people to get up to the microphone is to say something really, really wrong. So I think the previous search definition was much better than this.
Wow. Do I need to get that in front of us?
I mean, you can look at the previous version of it. It's on Data Tracker.
Yeah.
Do you want me to do it?
Well, I got a +1. That's, I mean, it was far from perfect, but and I think I found a list of 5 or 6 different problems with it, but I don't like this.
I'm finding it. Hold on.
You're fine with
You're
it.
finding
So
it?
you said, Mark, you're finding it.
He's
I
finding
thought
the
you said
previous
you're fine
one.
with it.
I thought you're finding it terrible as
I have
well.
funny
Yeah.
thing to say.
Yeah. Chairs and all that have opinions.
I think this is better than, well, I think the bullet points are better than the previous.
Okay, so that's an improvement we could port.
Just the bullet points.
But the structure, I'm talking about the overall structure.
The
of the thing.
nesting makes no sense to me. With the changes to the AI output and the changes to this, now the nesting doesn't make any sense because the AI output category is talking about this like much broader set of things. And then
that's what
and
the
then,
outer
like-
categories are for.
Sorry?
So the point of having an outer category is to catch a broader set of things than the inner category would.
Yes, that I understand, but I guess coming back to Ted's principle of like, what does it make sense for a potential declarant? Like, how would you explain to them what they're supposed to be declaring? It's like their asset could be used in like 5,000 different applications, and then the 5,001st is search. And so we're taking this like little tiny, not that it's tiny, it's a $400 billion industry, but taking this one use case out and saying it's nested, that just doesn't make any sense to me. So it would, I think it would be easier for us to consider them if they were not nested. There,
That was,
I got in the queue.
that was just something that we did because it seemed to make sense, but that doesn't have to happen. And I think that the general sense that I'm getting is that nesting them, it doesn't make sense. It just means we replicate a bunch of definitional work across two different categories, and we don't get to say one without the other, which in fact, with that structure, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have them nested anyway.
Thanks. Meredith?
Hi. I think in one way, search is probably the only category that we've talked about that most lay users can actually understand. Okay, I could explain it at parties, but the others are going to be a struggle. And the problem is, I think users actually care about why you're using a tool, not what tool you are using. So I think, like, not to give unhelpful feedback, but the things people actually care are you using this to create something that feels competitive and substitutional, and not are you using this tool? So for example, it's very hard to have definitions that don't rule out users that help users with disabilities using a tool to do something that is the same tool as users might do something substitutional with. And so the problem here is users actually care about what you are doing, not what you are doing it with. And so the search definition is really good. It's the definition that other people might understand, but the problem is it's super hard to have use-specific definitions here.
So Meredith, just to clarify there, the search definition is very good, you said. Which one?
I don't think so provocatively, I don't think it matters which one you use. I think
Okay.
people understand what search is. And so I think you can have any number of imprecise definition for search and they're fine. I think the problem is nobody cares about model building. They care about using a model to create competitive substitutional content. They don't care about using that model to create the exact same content for some personalized in-the-house use, right? They care about you creating a children's book that competes with theirs in the market. They don't care about you creating one for your child in the household, right? Like, the problem is the uses are where users actually care, not the tools.
Yeah, so I think the question there, and this may be not in scope for this discussion right now, but I do want to ask you this while you're here. Part of the reason why we had the model training category is the possibility that something would be used in the creation of a model that then could potentially be used to create substitutive works.
Right.
And so that's why we had that. And I think people do sort of understand well, you're not creating a children's book that's going to compete with my children's book. You're creating a children's book maker. And I think they do understand that concept. Is that still reasonable? Does that fit within your model?
Well, the question there is, can you distinguish creating a children's book maker from the other ways in which that tool is used? You can definitely limit it, but I think the concern is, for example, if you have a user with a disability who wants to use this to create a simplified version or a translated version, those are all scooped in with that. So you can create a maximalist tool that says, absolutely don't let my content be used for anything that could create competition or substitution. What that does, though, is it sweeps out all the other legitimate uses that people would allow if they reach that, but they make the decision based on the substitutional use.
Yeah, legitimate is such a loaded word. So subjective. I get your point. I think that's a good point. I think the counterpoint there that was raised during discussions was that open weight models that are produced out of these ones, you have no hope as the entity that's taking an asset and using it to produce an open weight model. You have no control then over what someone might then do downstream, and there is no distinguishing between the producing a substitutive work and creating an assistive tool or a translation tool or something like that. So this is, I think, the fundamental challenge that we have there. And maybe you're just telling us that we shouldn't be even trying because it's impossible.
A little bit.
Thank you. Maria?
Mia Kuhlmann Erickson. I think actually the term search is not clear because I think this is really breaking down the problem we have, that like people who want to press an preference, they think they know what search is, but because they use it every day, but the thing that search actually does changes continuously. And so the people who want to express the preference have an idea what search is, but what they get on the other hand is something else. So that's why I think we should really avoid this term, because there's no way to match these two expectations. I think what's better in this definition is really that it points out these two features or whatever that we want from this category, which is like a reference and link back. And kind of that's the thing that we need to explain. And by calling it search, I think it's actually more confusing than helpful. Everybody looks very confused now.
So
No, I just disagree. I just disagree. That's
Right.
that's fine.
So you're saying that these two constraints are not adequate to match the model that most people have in their mind for search?
They might be, but I don't think there is a uniform idea that people have about search.
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument, and I've heard it a number of times. I think the presenting a reference to the location the asset can be found at is, I think, the very definition of search. I think the verbatim excerpts thing is a decoration that we've added that's specific to this, which is an attempt to try to narrow this down to something that matches people's very sort of naive conception of what search is.
Even though that's not what it actually
And that's
does.
not what
Yeah.
search is.
Yeah.
And so that is a reasonable criticism, but I think Meredith's point there, I think, resonates much more with me. It's you need to think about what people are intending to do with it.
Mallory.
Mallory Nodal, Social Web Foundation. I just wanted to suggest maybe instead of search, you have the broader category be derivative, because that also speaks to what is meant by if you had a summary or a blurb or something. But more specifically to search, though, because I think we have to remember that website like content management systems or other things that people use have trained web admins and people who are publishing using web platform to build their metadata of every page so that it shows up specifically in a perfect way for search. Like, thanks all the folks who helped specify those things like title, thumbnail, right? So I'm just trying to indicate that I do think search is fundamentally different than any other kind of derivative because it's not just the content of the web page, but it's also the content in the metadata of the web page that's used to display search content, right? Folks are following me? So I think it's a special case. It's a very, very, very important special case, but there's all kinds of other cases of derivative works that I think would be the overarching category here of search, and that might allow for other things we haven't yet thought of in the age of AI, where you don't need like clunky metadata taxonomies to get your search, your website to show up properly in a search engine. We have like far more innovative and creative ways to potentially take content from all over the web, smash it together in a curated list, and then serve ads next to it, if that makes sense. So I think it's important to create a derivative works category that would include search, but not be limited to it.
I look forward to your internet draft. We had one of those, by the way.
Thanks. Brad Silver, Advanced Publications. So a couple of points. The first one, and my overall sense is also that this category needs quite a bit of work, isn't fit for purpose. The second bullet, the asset can only be represented in the output with excerpts that are drawn verbatim from it, I still think gets us into substitutive use territory. I don't think that because something isn't necessarily a summary doesn't mean that it can't substitute, particularly when particularly crucial part is being reproduced. It's being reproduced at a length that obviates the need to navigate back to the original content. So I think that's one that needs to be addressed. I'm also concerned about the bootstrapping of training to these output categories in general. It kind of then puts a blindfold back on to those that are expressing or declaring a preference, because they are not going to know or be, I think, able to understand or even control what kind of training a specific output may require. And that's going to vary from company to company. It's going to allow a form of training that then I think is not necessarily continuously linked to the creation of that output. It raises a lot of questions, and I think it begins to dilute the power of making an informed preference and understanding what that preference means. So that's I think problematic as well. And I think that and then as to the nesting idea, so I think the biggest problem with the nesting is the fact that search is more about wanting to say yes potentially, and the others are more about wanting to exercise the right to say no. And even though I think from a technical perspective, it's understandable why outputs would be the broader category and search would be the subset, I do think that it just does create a lack of clarity. And it would be helpful if these were two separate freestanding preferences that could be expressed independently, so that you know what you are expressing a preference about or not about. And that's, I want to make those suggestions. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. And I think like one of the things that I kind of want to point out from previous discussions is that there's a fundamental disconnect between the people who are expressing the preferences and people who are consuming it. What non-substitutive behavior in case of search is, right? I think that's something we kind of not like delved into, but I think like if you go into the Alyssa's point about use cases, if somebody says foundation model training equal to no and search equal to yes, how the declarant treats it and how the whoever is consuming it treats it might be disjoint. I think I just want to caution, like, just think about this. Thanks.
Timid Robot.
Hello, my name is Timid Robot. I wanted to talk about just the title of this category. I think search is good, bad. I think it's good because it's evocative. It's hard to talk about this category without saying the word search. It helps people get to where you're trying to go. I think it's bad because it's too generic and fraught. And I think a potential solution to that is to add a modifier so that you're using at least two words in the category. Something like citation search, indexing search, referencing search. I don't have a specific suggestion, but I think that could help both maintain the evocative nature while also making it so that people don't assume they know exactly what you mean just from the title. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Timid Robot. Alyssa. Yeah.
So I was noticing that a bunch of the comments that were made are addressed by the greater level of granularity in Krishna's draft. So in Krishna's draft, there's categories for indexing and retrieval. There's a display length, there's image, there's video, and then there's exact match. So I would just really encourage us to think about bringing those concepts in here. I think they would help a lot. And also the one that I sort of objected to previously, which was he just added generative AI training in there, is like dealt with through other portions of this. So I think like focusing in on the ones that are derived from like people's lived experience of search would be quite useful.
Yeah, so we did discuss that. I think we struggled a little bit to sort of get to the point where we were able to say that would be included. I think some of us had in our heads that this would be a sort of a decoration, an addition to these things, that you would be able to say, this plus some additional constraints on the length of the quoting, or some additional constraints on the size of the image, or the other things that are well established in the industry already and well respected in search products anyway. But I think we had some reservations expressed, and we didn't get far enough through the process to be able to confidently put them in the document. But there's, I think, a reasonable thing to do would be to continue that. There was also the question of whether that was in our charter and whether we could do that, or we'd have to deal with it. And we wanted to resolve those questions, but I think it's a reasonable thing to do. And as a natural extension of this, to Brad's point about, well, an excerpt could be the entire thing. I think someone talked about the RFC license, which says that you can make excerpts of RFCs, make the whole thing, and it works fine. This is something that I think concerns people, because it does create the possibility that it really does act as a substitute. So we can do that potentially, if this is the path that we think works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's continuously reflective of this like weird mismatch of trying to graft something onto, and on the one hand, search, which has 30 years of legacy behind it, and then on the other hand, like all this new stuff that people have experienced for 3 years. But like you can't ignore it.
No.
Like that's a fact. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's worth like just doing something super simple, even if it like fails to make sense in the context of search.
Good point.
Nate.
Hi, I'm Nate Hake, and I run a small travel blog. I spend a lot of time talking with other small bloggers, small creators about these issues. And someone had made the point earlier that it's important that we talk about like why we're doing this. And I totally agree with that, because I can't tell you how hard it is often just to try to talk to people about the difference between grounding and pre-training. Like it can take a lot of education to get that through. I don't have a firm opinion on this just yet. My initial reaction is I actually kind of like it, because I do think that this is a fairly simple definition, at least to me. Like this is something I could explain to my other travel blogger friends. And I think whether you call it search or traditional search, it does sort of like, that's clear what that is. The concern that I and many other folks I speak to have is that the lines between search and other AI applications are being blurred. And what I like here especially is the second bullet point. And I think without the second bullet point, this definition would be problematic, because you see what's happened, just the reference oftentimes is being hidden in like a modal or something that has like 90 different, links in it. And what we really care about, the why here is there like a fundamental fair exchange of like taking the content and potentially sending back enough people, enough users to that website where that exchange makes sense. And the problem, if you don't, the second bullet point solves for that, because you have to actually present my content solely as it is. But if you were to only have the first bullet point, the concern would be is that the mere existence of a reference wouldn't be enough, because we're already seeing these sort of user interfaces that are you're not going to get no user is going to click 91 times. Like they're going to click on only those links that are presented. So if it was based upon only that, I would say that it needs to be near or like on the same page, or really fundamentally what matters is, are we going to get fair exchange back for what is being sort of used? With that said, I think this is a major improvement on the past definition, primarily because it's something that I think actually could explain to average creators out there.
Great. Thank you, Nate. Fars.
So I just wanted to, so I keep talking about Krishna's drafting chat as well, and I think that we should give it a serious reconsideration, especially where we have problems. I mean, in Krishna's draft, search is not even defined. I don't see it. I think we really need to go back and have a look and see what we can take from the draft. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think it can resolve some of these problems. So and another thing that I wanted to mention, I'm also a small site operator. It's just that I actually outsource it, and someone else makes decisions for me on declaring the preferences. And when I don't have time, I don't know what decisions they make, and I don't know what traditional searches or what AI searches. I learned it in Zurich. And, when they declare it on my behalf, then they might say no, and I want to be in every search possible. I want to be in AI search. I want to be in every search possible. Thank you.
So just regarding Krishna's draft, we've been working with him to get the ideas in that expressed as issues, and he's just opened a bunch of new issues in the repository because it's confusing to have parallel drafts where you're not sure where the changes are intentional or not. And so if you see things that aren't captured in those issues that he created, point them out to us or work with him or whatever, so we can make sure we capture that, because that's a more efficient way to figure out what we need to focus on.
Yeah, thanks first. And just like also one more data point is related to what you said. There was a presentation in MapRG, like how, let's say you use WordPress for this, how many people actually bother changing the defaults. I think that's one of the reasons like we need to be cautious like what we do here, because most of the time people, like maybe you would go and do it, but most people will not do it. I think that's part of the concern, like why we should do the right things.
Sure. That's a good point. Victoria.
Hi, I'm Victoria Noble from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I just wanted to emphasize the point made earlier by Meredith about the fact that the current definitions sweep up quite a lot of uses that are important, socially important, and I think that many content producers, people expressing preferences, would probably want to authorize things like making content more accessible for people with disabilities or translating it and things like that. The other point I wanted to make was that I also agree that trying to nest search within AI output is probably more confusing than it is helpful, and it would be a great idea to separate it out if we can.
Yeah, we've already heard that. Consider that done, I would say, at this point.
Great.
Given the overwhelming feedback we have on that point. Yeah.
Great. Any other feedback on search? We've got about a little bit less than 40 minutes left. Ecker is in the room. Let's go ahead. Timid Robot, last word on search.
Yeah, I was actually hoping to get a little bit more clarity from Victoria and whether the idea of kind of unintended consequences limiting pro-social use is specific to search, or if that is targeted more at the automated processing top-level category.
Can I directly answer?
Please.
That's a great question. I actually think it's both. I think all of these definitions tend to sweep up things that maybe weren't intended, but search in particular, I think covers a lot of tools that, may not fit within our definition of search from a few years ago, but now a lot of search tools do include things that may not be verbatim excerpts, but may summarize things or aggregate them in a way that can be really helpful, and particularly helpful for some users or more so than others, and in ways we may not be even anticipating here. So I think that's really important to point out. So it's not just about search, but I do think search in particular has problems with the verbatim excerpt requirement.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, then let's move on. Upwards and onwards. Section 4.3 is now AI output. This is the really new thing in this draft. This is what was extensively discussed in Zurich. So I know it's new to a lot of folks, but if we can get some preliminary impressions, or especially after Martin's kind of presentation and the uncertainties he talked about, any reflection on that would be appreciated. And Martin, maybe you want to say a few more words about it?
I could say something inflammatory, that Aaron is going to do the same. Did it for me. Go on, Aaron. Up you get. Use the microphone. Oh, I can save it. You should have waited longer, and then you would have gotten something really inflammatory.
Well, hi, I'm Erin Simon, and
when we discussed this category, the idea was to really focus just on the output of systems and not on their internal operation. And I think Krishna also lodged an issue on this, but the reference to presenting outputs to automated clients, and speaking of clients, really reintroduces the internal system operation that we were trying to carve out. So I think it's pretty significant that this does need to be limited to things presented to human users. And I think that the reference to automated clients was attempting to address like humans using tools or software or agents, but there has to be some much more firm way to specify that this is about like an external boundary and not systems talking to each other. And so I think if we're going to try to solve for that, like agentic or tool using, we need to do it by saying this is like the human user or software that they are operating.
And so I want to poke on this a little bit, because I think we have a real problem with agentic browsing in this context, because how do you tell that it's a human on the other end of this thing?
Yeah, but I think you can tell that the system that is like being spoken to is not operated by the deployer of the AI output system. Like that, you know, if you want to,
then there's clients of that system. How does that?
Because a software can be a client of other software. You can like deliver
right.
like content from system to system to system, and this does not rule out those kind of like multiple systems within the same organization or overall product talking to each other.
Yeah, so this is the essential challenge. One of the bigger challenges with this system is when you break a system up in that way, you're going to have some system that takes in assets, and there are going to be downstream systems from that. And there's an obligation through the use of an asset that has a preference related to this on the first system. But does that obligation end where its boundary ends? Or does it have to do something to ensure that things downstream of it comply with the obligations that it's taken on in the use of that? And so this is why it gets really challenging. I don't know how to solve this problem. And if you have a solution for that, then that would be great.
I don't think it's that challenging though, because it seems like what you're saying is you want to control what like internal back-end systems say to each other.
No. I'm talking about the fact that if you're going, so you have this giant monolithic thing. From the outside, it looks like a giant monolithic thing.
Yep.
And so all the internal systems don't care about that.
Yeah.
But other people have systems that take a tiny piece of the problem and solve that portion, and then they're used as a component in a larger system.
Right. Across administrative domains.
Across administrative domains, and they deliver a component that is then integrated into a larger system by someone else, which might be integrated again. And if one of those components takes in an asset and has this obligation associated with the use of that asset that applies on some system 3-4 systems downstream, how are they going to ensure that that obligation is met there?
But the way to solve that isn't to say that every step needs to treat its clients as the human user. It's to say that the system that we're talking about here is whatever combination of things ultimately produce that output to a user. And
I think
then
you just
leave
said
it
the
to
same
them
thing that
to
I did.
communicate with each other in a way that makes that end result possible.
Right.
Like if
So-
the goal is
so-
to express the preference about the
Yes.
end state output, then it shouldn't be trying to dictate the way that those like intermediate systems communicate with each other to accomplish it.
All right. I'm going to let other people speak, but I don't think you've solved the problem. I think you've made it worse.
Ecker, I may be here to make it worse as well. I can't decide actually if I am or not. Let me try a hypo on you, and you can tell me what you think this semantics say. Say I have a procedure for I'm trying to provide using these specialized terms for producing a foundation model. And that procedure is I have some hyperparameters, and I have a corpus of data, and I present the model with the parameters with the data, right? And then I like spit out 50 exemplar outputs, and some human looks at them and says, these suck. And then I tweak the hyperparameters and I do it again. And I keep doing that. And now I'm feeding data to the system, which has foundation training on, AI output off. Is that a permissible practice or not?
That's a great question.
Okay. And just to and so now I want to make the problem slightly worse, which is that I don't think organizational boundaries is the right. It's quite is getting the job done. Because say I am a giant software company, and I train a foundation model, but I only do SaaS software. And I train a foundation model, which I then use to emit source code, which I run my system on. No human outside my company and no human maybe inside my company ever sees that, because I'm a real Vive coder. So I just like AI to compiler to deploy, right?
Yeah.
Is that an AI
PowerPoint compiler? Well, which piece is AI output? I think is the question you're asking.
I don't know.
Right, and I don't know either.
Okay, so I guess I'm not sure. As I think it may make the problem worse, but I'm sure. What I'm trying to figure, what I was trying to say is about whether it works or not is I can't tell whether we're nitpicking about language or whether we have a conceptual problem that we're fighting, and I'm worried it's the second, not the first. And so maybe these will act as an
I'm certain it's the second.
Maybe this will act as an intuition moment for other people to form their own opinions.
Right.
Thanks, Edgar.
Thank you, Edgar. Roberta.
Hi, I think it's the second. I'm really sorry. But I think it's something that happens on now AI protocols, right? And if you get input sanitization and things that are built inside of the models and the output handling thing that we have, right? So right now we are not but the industry wants something that will be autonomous, right? The idea is that the agents will talk within each other, and there's no human feedback at the middle, and we have an issue of liability with the information that will be translated to one another, and also about preferences, right? Because we don't have visibility for like the last node, so it cannot be like an intern system. So I think it's kind of a design issue right now, because we know that it should be like a human interface in the end to have the AI preferences, but we are building systems that are including AI as a human at the definition. And what I'm seeing is that we get to a point that neither like the end user that has no knowledge about AI preferences, nor the SEO user that will try to rank the data inside of AI search, not the output itself. It's being covered by the, I think Veronica was the Electronic Frontier Foundation said something about this, because we're not covering it properly for having the opt-out clear, but not like stopping progression of industry that are trying to use this as a best case scenario, and are doing proper, being good companies and not trying to steal data of everyone. So I think it's the second type of issue, and this worries me because it's kind of almost impossible to have the three groups agreeing at the same level of control. And I think that's why this is cyclical, right? I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elaine.
Good evening. The way this is written is very broad. Can you hear me?
Just a little bit closer to the mic.
I'm going to be swallowing. So this is very broadly written, and I'm wondering if someone could explain intention, or if we could figure out if the room thinks this is confusing to everybody. So specifically, two things. it's broadly written in that it brings in AI overview / summaries. It brings in grounding. Obviously includes search, or we did before we entered the room. That's one side of it. And then the third paragraph, second sentence, this includes outputs that are presented to human users and outputs, ... I really don't understand what that sentence means. So I'm wondering if we're all equally confused or if there could be some light shed here.
I think this is fairly new, like, and as a result of like a discussion, and this is trying to capture that. So if you have text suggestions to make it better, or send it. If not, if something is not clear, like Martin can answer, like at least what is the thought process that went into it, but nothing further than that.
Right. Yeah, I think Aaron might be a better person to talk about intent, but yeah, the words are probably wrong. As I think I've already said, I don't understand what this means.
Right.
Okay. And I did catch you saying, I've been involved in standards, not so much in IETF, and I get like you want some specific way to rewrite it, but it's very hard to offer that when I don't know the original intention there.
Right,
I just know
right.
I'm confused.
Right.
We seem to have a problem with the conception, like the very concept that we're trying to express, and so that's what we're trying to get to. If you have a specific concern, we can keep poking on that concern and try to work
Right.
through that. But if absent that, I think
right.
To be clear, that you've given good feedback.
Yeah.
This is basically text we're trying out on a wider audience. It's
Okay.
very new, and it's becoming clear that it's not adequate as it is.
Let me put it this way, and you don't have, at the front of the room, you don't have to answer this, but if anyone else said something in the queue or in the chat, if we put in a comment to say that sentence should be deleted, what would be missing there? Would someone scream?
oh no, that could probably go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we could rewrite it to mean something, to be more precise, but it was intended to be the output of the system, whatever the system is. And again, we then have to worry about what the system is. And to the point that we were talking about before with Aaron there, we don't know what that is either.
Alyssa.
I'm also very confused by this. So there's multiple of us. I've read this like 30 times today, and I don't know what it means. That notwithstanding, just returning to the organizational boundary issue or the administrative domain or whatever. So this is a place where I think having these use cases would help a lot, because Ecker and I were going back and forth about this morning. Like it might be the case that we can't come up with a use case where somebody wants to express a preference about like one of these slices within an organizational boundary, as opposed to just saying, if we make it the organizational boundary, then we're good to go in terms of like who gets which output consumption is the one that we care about. So for example, the SaaS company that uses assets to train and then writes software and then uses that software to do something else, like maybe anybody whose asset is being consumed for that purpose doesn't feel the need to distinguish between the software that is produced through the model training and the model training itself. Like maybe we just identify that that's not a case that anybody actually has. So that might be a useful set of things to do to distinguish between this human outputs and organizational boundary concern. Can we go back to your slide about this one?
Ooh.
No, that was like the hardest thing to do.
Meet Echo.
Okay. Because you had a couple things on here that I really objected to. So I wanted to revisit that.
Tell me where to go, Alyssa.
Sorry?
Tell me where to go.
The one about AI outputs, the questions, where it was like the questions about AI
keep going,
outputs.
keep going.
Yeah.
It's like slide.
That's here. This one.
Yeah,
keep going. That's about foundation models.
Next one. This one.
Yes.
There we go.
This one. Yeah. I definitely don't think the final question is a legitimate question for this group. Because this is a preference that's being expressed through whatever mechanism. So like it's
Okay.
people need to figure it out, but I don't think we collectively need to
No,
figure
no,
it
no.
out.
I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about it having a specific test in the thing, but really the question is, what test would you apply in a given situation to determine whether a preference could be respected or not? So how would you test the difference between respecting a preference and not?
Yeah,
Whether
that's what I'm saying. I
yeah.
don't think that's a legitimate question
Why
for us
not?
to consider. Because how do people do that today with robots?
Well,
However they
actually,
want. However they want. And people are arguing
That's
about that every
fine.
day on the internet and in the
That's
court.
fine. No,
right?
I think
So-
robots is very clear. There's a very clear test for robots in the sort of allow disallow crawling thing. There's a very simple test: is did this crawler request this resource?
But
right?
what I mean is that when we translate that into the actual world that we live in,
Yes.
like everyone is having their own test now. Did my asset appear in the training data or not? Can I reproduce something which looks like it's a copy of my thing? Like,
yeah, no,
we're not in the
that's
middle
not the
of
level
that.
of test I'm looking for. I'm just looking for, given your use cases or the list of use cases we might generate, how would you determine whether or not this particular use case, following it through in a very specific circumstance, whether that preference was met or not, knowing full well the internals of everything, not just looking at it in a sort of opaque system sense. Just, if you're operating that system and you know how that system operates, how would you be able to say, yes, this is following the preference, or no, this is not?
Okay.
That's the test I'm talking about, not
right.
not
like
just
for me and my company to be able to do that
Right,
ourselves.
yeah.
But acknowledging that like everyone might be doing that differently from each other.
Oh, sure. Everyone's going to make their own judgments.
Okay.
All the systems are going to be different.
Okay.
The circumstances are going to be different. But you should be able to sit back as someone who's building one of those systems, understand your system, and say, here's where the line sits. When someone says no, this is what I will do. When someone says yes, this is what I'll do. And what is that? Where's that line? You should be able to draw that line.
Okay. I think that's fine as long as it's not something that needs to be the same.
No,
for
no,
everybody.
absolutely not. No, every
Okay.
system will have their own
Yeah.
things.
Okay. I also don't think the second to last question is a legitimate question. Sorry. It's like, to me, this is like, yeah, people need to figure it out. It's hard. It turns out that like this is a hard problem.
No, there's a fundamental question here in the definition of this. And I'm going to ask you to go back to the definition now, just to
stop
really
sharing.
annoy.
No. In the slide or in the
No, the
actual-
text.
Okay, I'm out. Sorry. You're right.
Because the very first line of this one basically says, in the generation of outputs of the system, or something like that. It doesn't talk about anything about the internals of the system. And I think that's deliberate, but it also has some interesting implications for building some of these systems. So conceivably, you could use an asset in an AI-based system for any purpose other than generating outputs under this definition.
Yes.
And are people comfortable with that is a question you would ask.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Okay. Okay. That's not how I understood it from when you described it.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Alyssa. Ted?
Ted Hardy, several minutes ago now, we had the question asked whether everybody was equally confused, and I can now answer definitively that no, we are not, because I'm a great deal more confused, certainly now than I was a few minutes ago. The next time I'm presented with a checkbox of whether or not I'm a robot, I really won't know, because this whole question of whether or not I can know whether I'm whether this is being presented to me as an individual, or whether it's being presented to the system, presenting me with the pixels or not, I won't be able to click. I'll be frozen in space and time. I look at this and I say, what changes if I take AI out of this? In terms of why somebody would express a preference, I'm going to go back to the comment I made before. If I'm willing to say, look, I have given prices on this, and I'm willing for you to go off and hand tabulate them to create a price matrix with the other prices you found on other people's websites. I don't care that you used AI. What I care about is whether or not I'm okay with you producing a price discrimination matrix from the data I presented. And that's a very different decision than if I have data on there about what the weather's like for me, and you're going to go off and take my observation and a bunch of other observations and build a weather model for the area that you have observations for. People's desires to express these preferences aren't about, and at least in my very, very sparse understanding of this, exactly what tools you used to create the output. They're about the output itself.
Yeah.
And I think we had a very cogent explanation before that a huge differentiator in this is whether or not the output is something which might substitute for the work of the person who created the original asset. And I think if we did nothing else but created a way for a preference system to express whether you were or not willing to do that, it would be a good thing to build on. Because a lot of this is really, once again, going to be very difficult to explain to people, whether they're travel bloggers or me. I don't travel blog, but equally confused. And I think there are maybe use cases that we can use to drive expressions of this that help people understand why they want to make these preferences known. And to go back to what Alyssa was saying just a moment ago, then once the preferences are expressed, how you as a system that receives the preferences interprets whether or not it applies to you is a very complex question that trying to write it into an RFC is going to be a failure because it's going to be about the how you do it in some ways. And all we can do is write what the preferences meant to the people who expressed them and let the people who intend to honor them do their best. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Ted. That resonates for me. I think around Zurich, we started talking about this idea that this isn't really specific to AI in many cases. It's about the purpose of the processing, and maybe training is an exception to that. That is AI specific, but the rest of it is much more generic. And if that means we need to consider rechartering, I think we might have to have that discussion.
And there's also Brad's draft. So
True.
So Ted, this is not a novel idea. We have a draft on this. Brad Silver's draft talking about substitutive use. And it does use the word AI, but when you look at it, it is exactly the sorts of things that you're talking about. And from that angle, that's one thing we have considered. We didn't get a lot of traction on that one. We talked about it a little bit at the interim meeting, but we didn't seem to get a lot of interest in that. But it's certainly still, I think it's still fair game given the discussion we've had thus far.
Can you just explain what it is that you haven't considered?
So this is the Bradley Silver's draft
I'm posting a
on
link to it. Thank you.
substitutive use something or other. I think that draft is quite clear about its intent. It's just we haven't had a lot of discussion about that.
Thank you. Elaine.
A question about the penultimate paragraph, especially considering that it sounds like search will be unnested. What does it mean to have that paragraph still in there if search is unnested? Do we need to say something about model training in AI output?
That's a great question. I think that's probably something that we need to work out as well.
Pick that. Yeah.
Right now, I think this entire thing is in jeopardy. So I don't know that that specific concern is going to kill it or save it. But I think that's a good point. I think the concern there is that if we don't allow some amount of training, then maybe some of these systems don't work, but maybe without search, then we don't need to worry about it anywhere near as much. So we could I think my inclination would be to remove that paragraph and see how we go if we split search out. But again, I don't know what it means.
Meredith.
Sorry, I was trying to take notes and type too many things. I just wanted to say that I think there's a lot of unintended consequences to coming back to substitutive use as our definition of what people want. I think that may be what they want, but it's a wild expansion of what preferences or ownership we recognize in any other context. And so while it might solve our narrow problem of helping people do what they want, I think it would create a very large set of downstream problems.
Roberta.
Yeah, so Alicia, I'm sorry.
Alyssa, yeah.
Yeah, so she pointed out about examples, and I work at the health industry, right? So one of the examples for AI preferences that I can think of that it's like an application is, for example, if we are trying to get the maximum amount of usage and things about a medication and do like a training on medication information and then provide this to users, like the whole system would have considerations for the user itself, the training and the agent that will follow up into the data in other sites, websites. And all of this can have, for example, the medication might still not be open to the market, but the pages for the medication might be there and be crawled. We could have information that it's outdated that could put the user in jeopardy and risk. We could have users not knowing that this data was trained by an agent and it's consuming AI. So that might be a more broader example of intertwined things related to AI preferences and whether we will be specifying or not. This is what I could think about, because this inside, even internal in the company, like in the hospital, those type of models and agents are the ones that we put like a high risk because of the type of data they are consuming and doing the training, right? So, and the other thing is how the behavior of someone that will not abide by the preferences might be, because we have entire business cases of companies doing crawling, even with robots.txt, and this is really broad. Like in Brazil, it's really common to have those kind of companies using crawlers as, the entire base of the business model of them. And then like LATAM or, American Airlines will change one line of their script of the page and everything will break. And yeah, those kind of stuff is pretty common, right? So are we thinking a step forward of how to maybe give the tooling to enforce this as liability maybe? No, this is out of scope.
It's certainly out of scope. Yeah, thank you. Not the enforcement. Thank you. Victoria, thank you.
Oh, and we're gonna cut the queue because we're almost at time. So folks could be reasonably brief.
I will be brief. I wanted to emphasize again that, as others have said, this really does impact users in a lot of ways that I'm not sure are intended, or at least we're accepting as consequences of giving this preference to people. But I'm not sure we're adequately valuing or even recognizing all of the use cases. And I also think that trying to balance the costs of this type of thing to users versus the benefits to publishers or authors or anyone else who might express preferences is really not a task for a technical standards body. That is a policy making or a regulatory or a legislative task that I'm not sure we can resolve with just better code or better definitions.
So Victoria, I encourage you to read section 3.2 of this document. We've had this debate a number of times, and I think it may go some way to addressing your concerns. Maybe not all the way, but it's certainly a point that we've heard a number of times already.
Yes, it does address my concerns to some extent, but this also is intended to have binding consequences in at least some jurisdictions. So it's not that this won't do that at all.
Yeah, this is not a legislative body, so thankfully we maybe don't have to worry about that so much.
Okay.
Am I next? Good. So Martin, you suggested a minute ago removing this line, the penultimate sentence about the AI category inclusive of model training, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I think that will have an undesirable consequence, and I will attempt to describe it to you, which is even if we stipulate that this is nested inside of foundation model training, there are other kinds of training than foundation model training. And so the consequence could be that if you do not have that exception here, that I actually cannot do all kinds of things that you might otherwise want to do and which would be sensible to do, because I'm only allowed to train foundation models and not allowed to, I don't know what, like some other thing that isn't broad-based or whatever, like the adjectives you have around foundation. So I think you're going to, so I'm not saying this can't be fixed, but I think that if you just strike the sentence, you're going to be sorry.
Yeah, good point. I don't know.
Thank you.
Difficult.
Leela?
Hello. In the interest of being very brief, I'm just going to say I agree with the folks who say these should be things that normal people can understand and don't require a lawyer to parse whether or not you comply with them. So keep it simpler. I don't have specific language for you yet. This is all still new, but I will do my best. I am also deeply concerned about this substitutive use thing being the thing that people want to prevent. I get why. Nobody loves competition and they don't want to have to fight it out in the market, but competition is very, very important for society. And so it's, as Tori was just saying, we really need to think hard about the balance of what tools we're giving people versus the potential impacts on really narrowing what people can do on the web. And finally, I want to address, I'm so glad that somebody brought up section 3.2. I think it's very, very important that we maintain that inside the standard itself, because because it's important that the idea that there are good reasons not to follow the standard to be part of the standard itself is because there are some jurisdictions that are trying to legislate compliance. So having that flexibility built in is important. On the other hand, coming from the United States and knowing how people interpret these sorts of flexibilities, usually more risk-averse entities will not take advantage of them. And so I still have a lot of concerns, even with that section there, especially for human beings that are trying to use systems that make the web more accessible to them. And they don't care whether that tool is AI or not. They just know if it works for them and helps, a blind person be able to access a website that they otherwise might not be able to access. So I think these are things that we need to be thinking about across the board. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So with that, we're just about at time. We'll come back on Wednesday right before the plenary, and we'll have a pleasant discussion about automated processing to start. So look forward to that. Enjoy your evenings.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for being respectful and making your point. And please continue the discussion on the mailing list. Yeah, we're going to talk on Wednesday, but if you do have any something like, brainstorming stuff, please put it on. Like, I think we learned a lot of things here. So if it triggers something, please do it. Thanks.
That was good, positive interaction. Not much progress, but positive interaction. Let's chat with Martin real quick in a minute.